Genius, MLKX focuses on iconic civil rights era geniuses Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, exploring their formative years and pioneering accomplishments with their formidable wives, Coretta Scott King and Betty Shabazz, leading by their sides. King and X are two visionaries who ultimately rose to pioneer a movement. Joining this Gold Derby panel for the making of National Geographic's Genius MLKX, we have award-winning executive producer Reggie Rock Bythewood and Gina Prince-Bythewood, and of Undisputed Cinema, editor Adam Penn, Jeff Stetson, executive producer and writer of The Meeting, which served as inspiration for the series, Channing Godfrey-Peoples, director of the first episode Graduation, and executive producers and showrunners Raphael Jackson Jr. and Damione Macedon. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to go straight to Reggie and Gina. What brought both of you two on to explore these stories now, and why is the series more relevant today than ever?
I'll take the first part of it. We were approached by Brian Grazer and Imagine Entertainment to do a season 4 of Genius about Dr. King. We respect the franchise. Obviously, have immense respect about Dr. King and his genius. But those of us who really paid great attention to the civil rights movement also recognize that we would not have as great a movement without Malcolm X. He was pivotal. They aligned many times. Sometimes they had difference of opinions, but we really saw a very strong narrative in doing MLKX as opposed to MLK. Fortunately, Imagine and Nat Geo saw it our way, and when we thought about executing the series, one of the other things that we referenced was just a really fantastic play that I saw decades ago called The Meeting, written by our pilot writer, Jeff Stetson. And we also use as a tool a really great book by Peniel Joseph called The Sword and Shield, and really look to just execute a series that just brought us into the civil rights movement in a way that we hadn't seen before.
And why now? Is always a question that we ask ourselves. And we all know we're in a time where history is being rewritten or erased, and to have a platform such as this, to have the Genius franchise to be able to tell the story of these two geniuses and really reclaim the right narrative, which doesn't wholly pit these two men against each other, but shows the way, as Reg said, they've been aligned, how they both had the same goals. They just had two different ways of going about it. But the fact that, and also their two incredible wives, Coretta and Betty, and how integral they were to the movement, it just gave us this chance to tell this story in a way that we felt had not been. And that was a great excitement to all of us.
Also, Gina, just like early on, we talked a lot about how people always made us feel like we had to choose between Malcolm and Martin. And, MLKX just kind of obliterates that idea.
Yeah, we needed both.
And it started as MLK, and then you decided to bring in X as part of it, right? So why this is the first of the Genius series to have two subjects and sort of show those parallel lives. Why that choice, and at what point in the process did you decide we need Malcolm X in this as well?
Oh no, right away. I mean, again, as much as we revere Dr. King, we're also very clear, in our early conversation, when something like this, you don't get to have Martin without Malcolm. And then we explained what that meant. And, they embraced that idea. And so we just right from the jump, that was our initial response. And that's what we set out to do. And, then again, we just contacted this great team to help execute this amazing vision.
And Raphael and Damione, how did you two come in as showrunners? And what's something that you learned while working on this series that surprised you the most?
Our participation came a little bit after Reggie and Gina kind of set the baseline for what the series was going to be. We stalked them and followed them around Hollywood until they took our calls and decided they would work with us. Now, No, we were flattered and humbled enough to get a phone call that at the time Reggie was off working on Swagger, Gina was making The Woman King, and they needed somebody to come in and kind of be the leaders of this ship. And for Raphael and I, two African American men who've grown up in this country with the photos of Martin and Malcolm on our wall, the chance to put our names on the list of folks who brought this particular season of Genius to the forefront and got to take the baton of Martin and Malcolm to the next generation was something we were completely humbled and flattered by, and jumped at the chance to do so. So we were, that's how we came on board, and we were very grateful and happy to do so.
And for the record, we're still not taking your call, but it's all good.
This is the first time I've talked to Reggie and Gina in years.
Well, Reggie and Gina, you can take my call. You don't have to take the call. We can make sure we have that line of demarcation. But within what Damione said, there was so much surprising material that came out of once we extended beyond just, the early process of it and really dove deep into it. Once we were able to kind of bring onto the table, the scholars and the historians, one of them being Jeff Stetson on the call right now. We really were able to kind of dig into who Martin, Malcolm, Betty, and Coretta were beyond just the posters and the T-shirts. And so that was a lot of surprising elements that was born within just diving into and learning about all these icons. So,
well, I heard you put together a think tank. So what was the think tank? Who was in the think tank? And what did you do in the think tank?
Yeah, no, we from the jump, before we started our writers' room, myself, Raphael, Reggie, Gina, and Jeff were lucky enough to gather a group of historians who either knew Martin and or Malcolm or Betty or Coretta and wrote about them. So Peniel Joseph was somebody who was a member of that think tank who wrote The Sword and the Shield. And I've said this before, I have a degree in history, and I went into that experience extremely confident that I knew quite a lot about Martin and Malcolm and Betty and Coretta. And I'd say 30 minutes into our first 2-week session, I was humbled that there was so much about the four of them beyond, like Raphael said, what was on the T-shirts, what we all learned in our history classes growing up. And it was more so to who they were as people, what they valued as human beings, that really began to drive the thematic engine of what we wanted to do with the series in whole. Was we didn't want this to feel like a history lesson. We wanted this to feel like you could have an aha moment each hour in learning how incredible these great people were. So from the jump, we were inundated with information that we ultimately passed along to our writers' room about the moments before the moments of the iconic things that we've seen them do, but also just about how they became relationships, how their relationships started, how they were fathers and husbands and friends and dealt with personal tragedies, and how they were nurtured growing up. It was that kind of information beyond the details of the great things that they did that consumed what we started, and that group of people who participated in that think tank led the charge in that, and we're so grateful that they did.
And it's a direct result, frankly, of Reggie and Gina, because a lot of times, we've been in the position, as showrunners and EPs, to where, naturally you don't necessarily have the amount of time to dive into a think tank within the show. But it was something that Reggie and Gina really hit home, that it was important and imperative for us to, before we get pen to pad, let's sit down, take a breath, and really collectively as a group learn about Martin, Malcolm, Betty, and Coretta beyond what we know. And so we had, Dr. Barbara Reynolds. We were blessed to have Ambassador Shabazz, who's the daughter of Malcolm X. Like we said, Dr. Peniel Joseph, Jeff Stetson was also involved with it. So we had a multitude of people, but it was opposite of what you would normally have within your normal setting of creating a television show. So it was important for us to kind of sit down, take a breath, and breathe within learning who the icons were, to begin to create them as characters and build a television show. So that's a direct testament of Reggie and Gina to emphasize us doing that.
And part of thank you for that. Part of that was also, we are tackling icons you have to get it right. And so that deep dive was about getting it right and getting a holistic view. So not only people, as Damione said, who knew them, but also we wanted to talk to people of that world. So Pastor Mike is somebody that we spoke to who is in the world of Black church, and Dr. Muhammad, who is a Muslim scholar and psychologist, I believe, who helped us get into the head of Malcolm and Betty and what that relationship might be like. So, you know, it was so important to us, as I think everyone spoke on, to tell the story a little bit differently. We were never going to focus on just the trauma. We wanted to bring the humanity to all four of these geniuses. And the way to do that is this deep dive that we were very intentional on having.
And Jeff, I want to come to you because you wrote The Meeting, which is, it sort of gave this series the launching pad. What inspired you to write that play at the time that you did? And then what was it like to adapt it for the screen?
It was an unusual process in a sense. I was Dean of Faculty and Staff Affairs for the California State University system, which at that time was about 20 campuses. And I would visit the campuses often in my capacity. And I was asked one day, would I be interested in teaching a course? And I said, I would, but I wanted it to be a course that dealt with the civil rights movement and brought in students from various academic disciplines. I wanted to bring these students together because most were not alive during the civil rights movement and knew very little about the struggle, and particularly the two iconic figures we wrote about. I was concerned that in this country in particular, in order to embrace Malcolm, you had to reject King, or if you embraced King, you had to reject Malcolm. And I wanted to show that both of these extraordinary men were part of the process that granted us the kind of rights that we have today. And as it turned out, I didn't have time to teach the course because of my schedule. And so I wound up actually writing the play, because if I had taught the course, I had thought about writing a one act just to stimulate the students, get them to, you know, be entertained, and then begin to do the research into that movement and to begin to ask questions about what worked, what didn't, and why. And given the value of hindsight, what would we do today differently that we thought would be a better process? With regard to you know, the adaptation for the series, it really wasn't an adaptation at all. It was really an inspiration. And we took the essence of the play, why these two men are important, why we have to begin to elevate Malcolm to the same degree that the country's always elevated Dr. King. One of the beauties about the series is that we now call both of these men geniuses. And we hope that when you think about Malcolm, you automatically think about King. And when you think about King, you'll think about Malcolm. One of the things about the success of the play is I knew a play about Dr. King wouldn't bring necessarily folks that cared about Malcolm, and vice versa. So when you bring both of them together, you bring in very different aspects of the people who come to theater. And one of the extraordinary things about the play, which has been around for over 40 years now and produced in every state, more than a dozen countries, one of the fascinating things for me is to be in communication with audiences and staff all around the world who seem to know more about Malcolm and King and the kind of impact they have on the struggle than many of the people in the United States. So I'm very grateful to both Reggie and Gina for thinking about expanding how we look at the civil rights movement. And particularly, we had a fascinating, passionate, intelligent group of writers who were committed to doing all they could to not only acknowledge these two giants, but also the impact that their wives had on their lives. And just as importantly, the many people, known and unknown, who made this movement work.
And Channing, for you as a director, you know, how exciting was this for you to come on? And what was the biggest challenge of telling these two stories simultaneously in the episode? Because they're not together. I mean, this is like two shows in one. And you show they meet. There's just that one meeting where we see them shake hands, but otherwise it's two separate stories, and you have to make these lives parallel.
Oh, I mean, it was ambitious. And, even thinking about it was like, oh my goodness, this is a lot to tackle. But I think Reggie and Gina have mentioned this already. They really leaned into the humanity of these men's lives. They wanted a very nuanced version of this story and, the story with all of its complexities. And it goes back to this, beautiful script that Jeff has written, that essentially starts at their origins. And so it was a little bit terrifying, but knowing that we were leaning into this really human character forward story, that got us close to them as men and as women. That really helped me because I'm really, I'm a character focused director. I, love seeing the humanity in the work. And so this was in keeping with, what I had done in other work. So it ultimately, it was exciting. And I also have to say really quick, I have to shout out, our leads because the casting was so incredible. You had these four actors who were just, unbelievable. Some, all of them, I think, rising in some way. I know Kelvin has been on you've seen him in probably every independent film, and many of them are rising, but they all were really like nuanced and specific and were ready to lean into this human telling of the story. And that I was unbelievably excited about that. So,
I just
And
love to add to I think that that's one of the great things that Channing, that Jeff, that the team brought together is even when we did the think tank, we were getting these historical accounts, but it was really like about their humanity, them as human beings, and just the subtleties, the nuance, the different levels and gears that we see in the performances. Channing told a very visually cinematic story. Sometimes it's dependent on great dialogue by Jeff. Sometimes it's dependent on imagery, music, and just I appreciate you, Channing, shouting out our amazing cast. But just a shout out to you as well because it's just really a beautiful. We like to think of the series as an 8-hour film, and so hour one is just a beautiful contained film.
And Adam, what was the biggest challenge for you in the editing room? Because you've got these two stories as well, and you have to cut them together. So you're getting this great footage from Channing. How do you go about cutting them together, and what's that collaboration like?
Well, the biggest challenge was really just the fact that it was two parallel stories we're telling. It's not something I've ever done before, and I found that really exciting and a little daunting because of who these men were. They're as iconic as you can get. But it was really cool to do that, to kind of tell two different stories. And I always kind of take my cues from the performances as far as, cutting style, pace, all of that stuff. And to have these two magnificent actors who have kind of different styles as the leads was really cool and really interesting and fun. And yeah, working with Channing was amazing. I would do it again in a heartbeat. She was a dream.
What about the rest of us? You don't want to work with us?
Of course.
No, it's fine. It's all good. It's all good.
All right.
I wanted to say that I loved working with Adam. I loved working with everybody. Like there is so much talent on this project. It's mind blowing. It still boggles my mind. Adam, just from the outset, like I loved in his previous work, I saw his taste. And I think to work with him, like he works, like we keep talking about humanity, but he works in this very human way. He'll dig in and do whatever he has to do to find character. And, I think it's sweet of you to say those things, Adam. We've spent many, many hours together. He's a fantastic editor.
What was the most challenging thing to cut? Like when you think back, like, is there a scene that you were like, oh, that stands out?
Yes. Well, it's a series of scenes that were challenging and a little again, a little daunting. There are a lot of speeches in this show. And again, I've never cut just a straight speech before. And that it was just interesting. First of all, there was a lot of footage for those speeches. So right there on that level, it was a challenge. But then also just sort of feeling out, because these speeches are long. There's a at the end of the first episode in prison, Malcolm gives this amazing speech. And it was just from an editorial standpoint, it was really just sort of navigating when to kind of step on the gas with the cutting and when to just like stand back and let the actor do his thing. So there was a learning process for me putting that together. But I'm really proud of how that came out. I think it was acted amazingly, shot well, writing. It all came together for me. But it was that was.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think and by the way, I agree with you, Channing. Adam is an amazing editor, and I think one of the other challenges is, as we say, we think of it as an 8-hour film, but each one of those hours could have grown into 90 minutes, and so I think also, one of the challenges was to not, because we didn't have more than an hour, one of the challenges was not to cram everything in there, and there was a lot of beautiful work that was laid on the floor because, again, the narrative has to still breathe and take its time and have music. And if we ever do a remix, we got great stuff to add.
Go ahead. Just even on that, what I found just incredible was, because Adam said it just a few seconds ago, the idea of these two parallel stories. And, you have the actual content to purvey on the screen, but how does it look? And that was something that Channing really took a lead role on, crafting the visual aspect of making the worlds feel different between Martin and Malcolm. And Channing can kind of dive in depth as far as how the look and textures really felt. But that was something that, as far as for us leading off, we really wanted to feel like you were almost in a way living in two different stories. And how does Malcolm's world look and feel? The textures, the tone, the colors. How does Martin's world look? The textures, the tones, and colors. So that was something that Channing really kind of hit home early on, that allowed us to establish a baseline that all the rest of our directors that we were able to work with use as a guideline. But it was something that was very important to kind of begin to craft these two worlds that both of them live within.
Yeah, I loved it. And I think that my showrunners were definitely supportive of that, because they wanted a show. I mean, Reggie and Gina obviously had a mandate that we, were putting out a show with as high production value as we could. We were bringing all our talents to it and all working really hard. I think when I had early conversations with Reggie and Gina, what really I felt inspired by, Gordon Parks has this series called Segregation Story, and they're these beautiful, like, textured photos of like Black life in the 1960s. And I thought that we could take those photos, like, there's a part of that series that really has more kind of reds and browns and earth tones, and you see, young children like playing in puddles in rural areas. And then the other part of that series is more like fashion forward, more pops of colors that I felt like could lend it looked like it could visually translate to Martin's life. And then the other ones, the rural photos, felt more like Malcolm's life because their origin stories are so different. Martin having grown up, in a more like fashion forward, middle class lifestyle, and Malcolm coming from a more rural area, lots of children, as you can see in the series, the mother's homeschooling and things like that. And so those photos, I think, really informed visually, like what we were seeing, like how to visually separate the stories.
Well, let's talk about casting and Kelvin, Harrison, and Aaron Pierre, and how fantastic they were. I talked to Kelvin, he was like, I'm terrified. He said he was scared to death. And when we look back at these two icons, when we're learning about them when we're young, and we see these black and white pictures. So when I'm 12, to me, Martin Luther King is 65 years old. You don't realize these men died before they're 40. I mean, so they're taking on a lot in their 20s and 30s. So Kelvin really said he learned a lot by that, by kind of using that fear to realize these guys were scared too. Talk about Kelvin and Aaron and how you came to cast them and just their incredible performances.
Well, it was exciting because we all knew we wanted to cast actors who were the actual age that these men and women were. Because as you said, so many people forget how young they were, that Martin was 26 when he led the Montgomery bus boycott. And so to be able to embody these icons at these ages was a dictate to all of us. And we knew pretty early on who we wanted to target. Reg and I had worked with Kelvin on Shots Fired and had been following his career. Aaron Pierre, we had seen recently in Underground and how fantastic he was. And not only were they great actors, but they felt visually very similar. So, just another shout out to Channing. She's getting a lot, but it's true. There's the craft of the cinematic story that she told, but also what we were excited about Channing about is her relationship with actors. And as you mentioned, all of the actors were intimidated a bit to take on these icons, but to have someone like Channing who's so good with working with actors and being that calming presence and inspiring presence, really helped them bring out the best, and they just gave incredible performances.
I think one of the other things that was really fun, though, when we think about Kelvin and Waruchi, who plays Coretta, as deep as they are and integral to the movement, they're also funny. I mean, I love that date scene that Jeff wrote. And, you just see Kelvin as Dr. King, trying to give Coretta his best line, his best pickup line. And, it's also, I think that's the other thing that was really important for the show, right? Like we really wanted to hit the movement, but again, it was just fun to find organic humor in that, which I think that the cast, Jeff, Channing did, in such a great way.
Jeff, how do you balance that sort of the historical points that you need to make that, like everyone knows, with inserting dialogue like that? With we see Martin trying to be kind of like a smooth talker, and Coretta's having none of it. She's which probably made her more intriguing to him.
Well, I've never written anything that doesn't have humor in it.
Yeah.
I wrote a book about lynching and I had humor in it. As odd as that seems, because in order to live, you cry, you laugh, you struggle, but these are all the human dimensions. And so I don't think anybody wants to see kind of just a political dynamic taking place on the screen where these people are very different than the ordinary people that are watching it happen. They want to relate. In the end of the theater, yes, they're icons, but they're family members. They love their spouse. They love their children. They're trying to protect the children. And so it's important to just give that sense of being a human being who's attempting to change humanity so that everybody's child will live a better life. That's difficult to do, particularly in the Hollywood system, and specifically in terms of showing Black men in strong positions that love their families. But it's crucial we do that. One of the things I love about Reggie and Gina, I had been on a show of theirs some years ago, and they often brought in their two sons. And you see the love that exists between that family. And it's one of the things that just made me really respect and admire both of them, because one of the reasons I left the university was because of the images that Hollywood portrays about Black heroes, if any exist, and specifically Black men being able to love, particularly love their children and their family. So if we are able to do that in the kind of work we continue to do, to showcase the struggles, the humanity, but the love, which is important for us to survive the struggle that we are engaged in, then I think that's what all artists and what all writers ought to do.
Really love the father and son element in the pilot as well.
Yeah.
You know, the relationship that, you know, young Martin, you know, has with his dad and Malcolm has with his dad, and really does help frame, you know, who they become.
And how Martin's dad did not like Coretta. That was news to me. That the very awkward dinner table scene where he was like, "Can't you find someone else?" And Coretta just sort of sat there and had to bite her tongue a little bit. But I mean, there's a lot of that kind of stuff that was new to me that really humanized all of these characters.
Yeah, it was interesting because with Ambassador Shabazz, who's Malcolm's daughter, you know, in speaking to certainly us and the showrunners and the think tank, you know, one of the things that was really important to her is that, you know, people have this one image of her father, which is the gun in the window. And she wanted to make sure that we were showing his humanity, showing the fact that he loved to laugh, that he loved his kids, that he loved his wife, that he loved ice cream, you know, just those really personal things that would show a totally different side. And so to be able to have access to that kind of thing and that type of mandate was something that we all embraced as well.
You also show the women like we haven't seen them before. I mean, we get a full view of Coretta and Betty, and they even have a whole episode dedicated to them, really. And they're always seen as these peripheral figures when we hear about Martin and Malcolm. So how important was that for you to bring them to the forefront and tell their story as well? I mean, I didn't even know Coretta was an opera singer until I saw this show.
Yeah, no, you know, we took one mandate from the beginning that while this show is Genius MLKX, we had 4 leads. And that included Betty and Coretta and the performances that Weruche and Jamie gave in those roles, because to your point, they're the least known about in the historical context of all of the civil rights movement, but those 2 women are civil rights icons in their own right. And they are more than just the wives of and the sisters of and the mothers of. They were integral in making Martin and Malcolm who they were, but also in leading those men to become the men that they became. So for us, we treated it as if we had 4 leads, and doing that hour, our 5th hour, where we get to take Betty and Coretta and put them in the forefront of the story. We think, again, it's one of those hours that you're getting your vegetables without knowing about it, because you can hopefully be entertained and learn more about who these women were, but also see just how impactful they were in changing the course of civil rights, either through Martin and Malcolm or personally, and how they affected change. So one of the things probably we're the most proud about is that hour gets to highlight the incredible performances that those 2 women gave, but also giving us all an insight into who Betty and Coretta were as people, is something we're really, really proud of.
And I would also like to just take a moment to honor Ron Cephas Jones, who gives his last performance as Elijah Muhammad, the mentor of Malcolm X for a period of time. Talk about him and what his energy brought to set. When I spoke to Aaron, he said there was much wisdom to learn from him as an actor. So what was it like having him be a part of this for his final performance?
It was a blessing and humbling. You know, Damione and I were fortunate that we worked with Ron prior years ago, so we had a relationship with him beforehand. But when we were able to kind of work with him on a day-to-day basis, just the sheer professionalism that he brought forth every day. But beyond that, one of the things that's so underrated when you're trying to kind of craft a series is the chemistry that exists on set between your talent, and then how that kind of transitions also to your casting, to your crew as well. And one of the main things that Ron brought to the table was the energy. When he was there on set, there was a certain feel that you were excited to kind of work. and just the happiness and the energy and the creativity that he brought was something that's a testament we've seen within his entire career. To kind of see it within him embodying such a important figure within the civil rights movement as Elijah Muhammad was just incredible. So for us, we're honored to be able to say that we were the last ones to work with him within this project. But more than anything, hopefully the audience can see just how impactful and how he elevated the story of Elijah Muhammad within the movement overall and within the story of Malcolm and Martin.
And we're getting to the end here, but I want to just go around real quick. And it can just be a line or two, but I'm curious, all of you have such well-rounded backgrounds in various professions and in this industry. What's the one thing you're going to take with you from this piece of work that you did? And I'll start with you, Gina.
Oh, dang it. Like, let me think about this. What will I take? I think all of us, as you said, have bodies of work. And I think if you look at our work, there's a trend to believing in the respect of this platform and the importance to understand the power of this platform and being able to do this story and talk about all four of these icons. But again, as we talked about, reframing what people think about both men and their relationship. It was just a beautiful reminder of what we get to do and the power of what we do, and to just really never forget that and never lose respect for that power.
And Reggie?
It'll be very hard to ever go into another project and not do a think tank because of the way it fed the creative. While we've done it before, this was just a great experiment in discovery to really use music as a huge part of the storytelling, and whether it's contemporary and how to, like, I loved how we went back and forth from contemporary music to period music, which also relates to the other thing, which is, Genius series did have a great foundation. And it was just fun to just kind of disrupt the genre and disrupt in terms of storytelling. And so want to make sure I stay on that path.
Channing?
Look, I wish I had more time to think about an answer too. I think professionally, I'm still amazed I'm amazed but not surprised. Reggie and Gina are storytellers that I greatly admire, and I've come to know them as people who I greatly admire. And I think they assembled all of these wonderful talents who brought their talent to the work, who not only brought their talent but believed in it and put their heart and souls in it. So that's something that I aspire to. I think personally, when I saw our leads, it blew my mind, I think, and still does. As much as the way we learned in school, who Malcolm and Martin were, in a limited way, they truly were. I got to know who they were, who Coretta and Betty were, and how selfless they were. I still am just blown away. Like, they were parents who were literally passionate and fighting for, us, under the threat of death. And so to me, that still blows my mind, and is something that I take with me. And to be brave, maybe I will never be brave in that way, but it was just entirely inspirational.
Adam, how about you?
For me, the thing I'll probably take from this the most is honestly just kind of how grateful I am to work on a project where I was able to bring myself to it and do what I do, but also learn quite a bit and surprise myself. Reggie mentioned music a few minutes ago, and for me, in the past, I'd always been a real stickler with, like, we doing period stuff, stick to period music, blah blah blah. That was just my, I'm just, I guess, stubborn that way. And this completely opened my eyes to, like, it added a whole layer that I didn't see coming, and I think it was I just thought it was really cool to kind of see this become something that I didn't necessarily think it was going to be. It was really exciting for me.
And Jeff?
The civil rights movement did not begin in 1954. It didn't end in 1964. It's a struggle that goes on. There's still much to do in that movement for decency, integrity, and there's still a lot to do for us as writers and artists and producers to inspire the people that will make a difference in the future.
Raphael?
For me, I would say there's been a question that I've heard, and I feel we've heard throughout the process of why another piece about Martin or Malcolm. And one of my big takeaways is that there is a ferocious appetite to want to learn and experience it more than what we may think. And when you work with the people in Atlanta, you know, and you know, your extras, your cast and crew, and you feel the energy in the history within it, there's this ideal and the notion that the question isn't why another piece. The question, not even a question, the answer to that question can be that there's an appetite to learn more and to see and to feel and to know our history. And by experiencing that, it can impact us so much more now within our time and age. And so that for me is a big takeaway, that there is an appetite out there for the consumer, for the viewer, for someone who we may be blessed to sit down and watch our series. They actually want to learn about these icons. And so that's a big takeaway, the appetite out there that may be opposite of what the perception is.
And
He was
James?
at a time to think, man, this is gonna be good. Come on, man. Now we may have to call you back after this.
Damione, you got 35 seconds. Wrap us up.
No, sounds good. I'll say it from this perspective. You know, there were a multitude of iconic performances in films and TV shows that preceded us about Martin and Malcolm. It is an honor to be in that pantheon, to do something what we believe is emphatically different, but also the same. We take pride in taking that baton and handing this to a generation of people who only know Martin and Malcolm as street names or as quotes in Twitter or on Instagram. And we hope that this series informed them about who they were globally beyond those particular things, but also who they were as people. And my children, my daughter and Raphael's children, who were, like Jeff knows, in the writer's room with us multiple times, they're going to walk away from this knowing that that is possible for them to see Martin and Malcolm as peers, as people who could struggle and succeed in the face of some of the most important things that have ever happened in this country. So the fact that we got to do that and be a part of that pantheon, that there will be projects that follow us, and we think we've created something that can stand toe to toe with them, with iconic performances, beautiful writing by our staff, casting, editing across the board, directing. We feel proud to have done that we get to entertain people, and that they, like Raphael said, walk away having learned something new about who these people were and what they did. And that was the biggest thing for me.
Well, it's inspiring, it's educational, and it's entertaining. So it's current Genius MLKX is currently streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu. And thank you all so much for joining this fascinating panel today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.